and it goes way past ayahuasca. You know, we have to remember that there are so many other plants which are unnamed, unspoken about, and this incredible depth of wisdom that these people have, and I just want to to bring that up for them. And so this is where my journey started. I, for 6 months, was living 8 hours from the nearest village, and I had this boat, and my job was to find the endangered pink river dolphins, and we wanted to protect an area that the oil companies wanted to drill in. So for 6 months, I lived out in this part of the Amazon, and this is how I got around. So it just kind of shows you some of the size of the trees down there. Without a person in there, you have no idea of just the size and the craziness of the creatures. I don't know if anybody knows what this is. Anyone ideas? Here's another one.
How big is that?
It's about that big. It was once upon a time a butterfly, but it's now a mushroom. This is the craziness of the Amazon. It's a cordyceps mushroom, and if you're an insect and you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and one of these cordyceps spores go by, it will kill you and turn you into a mushroom. And so this is just like a little bit of the wildness that you find in the Amazon that is just amazing. And the BBC actually did an amazing little story about cordyceps, and they showed each insect has a different kind of cordyceps mushroom which can attack it. And these ants were filmed. And one of these ants appeared to be tripping. It was like raising its arms and legs, and it was like doing all these crazy actions. And then these other ants came over and they picked it up and they moved it far away from the termite mound. And when they researched what was happening, this ant then had this overwhelming desire to climb the tallest tree. And when it got to the top of the tree, it sunk its mandibles into the bark, and the mushroom just grew straight up out of the top of its head. Killed the ant. Now, if you were a mushroom and you wanted to sporulate as far and wide as possibly, how'd you get high to be able to spread your spores around? So that just shows the incredible intelligence of the mushroom species. And you see all this wildness down there in the Amazon. So, it's a shame you can't actually quite see it as nice as the pictures I can, but you can kind of get a gist of just the wildness and, when it's there in its pure form. But unfortunately, this is what has happened. The worst oil spills in the planet are in the Amazon. And that's in Ecuador. And so what has happened over the last 30 years is that these spills, thanks to Texaco, have gone from the headwaters in Ecuador all the way down the Amazon. And this threat to the indigenous people is so huge. I ended up making a film. I went downriver, all the way down the river Amazon, from Ecuador to Brazil, to research the effect of the oil industry on the indigenous people and the environment. And it just seems it's been one of the best kept secrets. I'm always interested in a room. Just show me how many people know about these oil spills in the Amazon. Nobody in here. These are the worst oil spills on Earth. 30,000 indigenous people against Texaco, now Chevron Texaco. The indigenous people have won against Chevron Texaco, and they lost their lawsuit, Chevron. They have been ordered to pay $11 billion to clean their mess up, and they still haven't paid. And Texaco appealed, and they lost their appeal, and they appealed again, and they lost their appeal. And so basically, this is the largest environmental lawsuit on Earth against one of the biggest corporations, Chevron Texaco. 30,000 indigenous people won, and we don't know about that. So, it was really important for me to be able to tell this story, so now that you can go out and tell others. And, once you know this, you can find the information. There's plenty of information. If you just put in oil in the Amazon, Chevron Texaco, you'll find out all about this massive lawsuit that's been happening. So over these last 18 years, I've been, very much a part of the lawsuit and what has been going on. This is, just a recent spill where you can see the level of black running through the forest. That's where the rivers have been running black with oil spills. So once the level of the water drops, it's, that's what's left. So it's like, well, okay, these are the problems, where are the solutions? What do we do when we see something like this? It's kind of, do we put our hand in our, kind of head in our hands and just say, well, shit, this is just too big to deal with, which is what I think happens a lot of the time. How do we find a way to actually deal with this kind of contamination on this scale? This is one of a typical pit that's been left behind by Texaco. There's almost 1,000 of them in the jungle, and they've all been dug out. So when Texaco first started working in the Amazon, they just pumped their waste into the rivers. And when the rivers died, the Ecuadorian government said, you can't just keep dumping into the rivers, you need to make holding pits. So they dug out a few pits and they dumped their waste in the pits. The trouble is, they never lined it with cement. So it seeps down into the groundwater. And sometimes it rains in the Amazon, and every time they overflow. And every pit is designed to overflow into the streams. So when I realised this, it was like, shit, man, this is massive. This is huge. And I started to see how sick the people were, the indigenous people in the Amazon. Their kids are covered in skin lesions, the highest leukemia rates down there. They will never use the oil, they will never have a car, and they will never fly. And they are the people that are really impacted by our lives. And so I kind of felt that, well, I've been part of this problem. So I also need to be part of this solution. I need to find ways, practical ways that can really help. So first of all, I came together with a group of scientists and we founded the Amazon Myco-Renewal Project. And this brought together scientists from around the world that worked in myco-remediation, bioremediation and phytoremediation. That's using fungi, bacteria and plants to remediate contaminated land. And we would do small-scale experiments and large-scale experiments to show a mushroom's job in the forest, anywhere, is to break down carbon, twigs, sticks, wood, Oil is just a hydrocarbon. It is able to break it down. So hydrocarbons, once the enzyme from the mushroom washes down, it's broken apart, hydrogen and carbon. You then don't have a bonded hydrocarbon. So that's what we've been working with, and we've been showing the experiments to local people and working on different scales, different substrates, different fungi, to look at how can we actually start to clean up this mess. Because one day, this $11 billion will come through. And we need to have a plan of how it's going to be cleaned up. So the BP spill, when that happened, we were contacted. And what would have been really good when the BP spill happened in the Gulf of Mexico would have been if they'd actually gone out with helicopters and dumped a load of substrate on the ocean. Because of course a mushroom can't clean up an oil spill in the ocean. But if you were to dump a substrate and then to pull all that substrate into land, then you could break down that spill. But they chose chemical dispersants. And, we all knew about that oil spill, it was all on the telly, and then it just disappeared. Well, it didn't disappear. The chemical dispersants just sunk it to the bottom of the ocean, which is where it is now. There's now just a big dead zone in that area. So a chemical way of dealing with oil spills just doesn't work. It makes it look better for all of us. We feel better because it's gone away and it seems... But we have to find another way of dealing with oil spills because it's a constant thing. So this is where myco-remediation comes in. And Paul Stamets and his book, How Mushrooms Can Clean Up the World, How Mushrooms Can Save the World, shows all sorts of, not just oil spills, from radioactive, from PCBs, dioxins, all sorts of chemical pollutants can be broken down using fungi. So I'm not going to go into great details on any of these projects. I'm just going to kind of give you an idea of all of the projects that I have been involved in. So this is, what the rivers are looking like. It's quite apparent when you see the rivers that they are running very contaminated, and this is what they're drinking. So I started with another woman from Ecuador, from the Committee of Human Rights, and so we turn up and I've got the power tools and we show kind of girl power, and then we get the guys to bring in the wood and we then build rainwater systems. So I've been building the families, those which financially are unable to build themselves a rainwater system. And in the little room in there, you might have seen there's all these crafts from the Amazon. And I work with indigenous people down there, bring the crafts back, and the money that is raised goes to build these rainwater systems. And what's really important for me is that we work together. They bring the wood and they help, and then afterwards they put a little roof on that. But this means that they don't have to keep collecting that contaminated water from the river. They can have a rainwater system. So these are some of the examples of some of the systems. I usually build about 20-25 families a year water systems. So just giving you an example. And it's just anything you can build it from the local hardware store. The filters, the top bucket there, which is like a big dustbin, that's just filled with gravel and sand and charcoal, and it comes down through the first flush, we don't collect the first bit of rain, into the rainwater system. So this has just been a simple way. Then the other problem is, plastic. It's like, man, okay, what do you do when you go to a beach and you see this? For years, I would organise beach cleanups. And, we would do our beach cleanup and we'd put it all in the sacks and we'd leave it at the back and we'd feel good. And then along come the birds and the dogs and rip it all together. Or they would set fire to it. Or, it just wasn't ever a real solution. So I was kind of looking at, well, what do we do with this scale of rubbish? And, we've all seen these awful pictures of these animals just filled with it. And it's like, we've got to find some really practical solutions to deal with this scale of rubbish. So I learnt first about eco-bricks, which was plastic bottles, and you put all the rubbish into the bottle. So you jam it all in there, the plastic bags, the batteries, the polystyrene, all of the stuff which is either being thrown into the rivers or the ocean. Jam it in a bottle, put the lid on, and you make a brick. And this was an area which was a really horrible bus stop where people waited for that, and it was just full of rubbish. And we decided we would clean the bus stop and we would make a bench. And I went back the following year and they had turned it into this beautiful garden. And the local council, this is up in the Andes, are now building 72 more of these eco-brick benches. So it was a real way of showing communities, look, we can turn all of this rubbish here into a construction. So I started off with kind of benches and walls and then we built this restaurant. And this was out of 3,200 plastic bottles filled with rubbish. And it was the first place in the Ecuadorian Amazon to serve local coffee. They all grow coffee and cacao. For anyone that hasn't actually seen real chocolate, that yellow pod is cacao in its natural form. And obviously they just take the seeds from the middle. But I wanted to drink coffee and they only have Nescafe. I was like, I don't drink Nescafe. Everybody is growing coffee and cacao and you cannot get a local cup of coffee. And then I came up with the idea of mocha. Now nobody in the Amazon has heard of mocha. And so I was on the radio and I was on telly and I'm talking about this famous drink, mocha. And everyone's like, what is this mocha you keep talking about? And I'm like, it's the taste of the Amazon. Like, what are you talking about, the taste of the Amazon? It's like coffee, cacao, sugar and milk. Now, if you ask somebody in Europe or America or Australia, everyone knows all about mocha. They can't grow any of the ingredients, but, everyone drinks it. So we opened this first ecological restaurant that was built totally with the village's rubbish and was the first place to serve hot chocolate and coffee and mocha and food that was wrapped in banana leaves instead of polystyrene, and making it a cool thing to actually wrap them in banana leaves and, show that we don't have to follow this disposable reality. So the restaurant, we then brought together a women's cooperative and that was how this restaurant came about. And then, as much as I hate cement, I hate rubbish even more. And some places you just can't work with cob. And so, in that way, I will justify working with cement. This is before, so you can see that we leave a window of truth, which shows that that's it after. That's a health centre that has been made totally out of the village's rubbish. And so by leaving that tree, the after window, all the hands are of the people that built it. But otherwise, it would just look like a normal concrete building. People would not believe it was actually made out of rubbish. And what's great for me is I can go into a village where there's rubbish everywhere. And when I leave, you cannot find a sweet packet. And in its place is something practical and useful, which shows that, we can build out of this stuff. But then I was invited the year before last to Colombia, to the Pacific coast. This is where the whales go to give birth. And they asked me, Eco Pacifico, if I would go and build a community centre there. So I rock up to build a community centre. I get down to the beach and it's like, man, this is just too much for eco-bricks. Eco-bricks are great in rural communities where it's a village's waste. not the ocean. When the ocean is dumping, it is spewing out tons and tons and tons of rubbish. There was part of the beach that was 6 foot deep in rubbish. And it's like, come on, Nicola, let's be realistic here. It's a nice idea to build a community centre, but actually it's not going to solve this problem. So this is when I researched about how we could turn the plastic into something else, and went to visit these kind of machines which chipped the plastic, melted it, and turned it into construction materials. And it was like, okay, on a big scale, this is better. Instead of cutting down the forest and making posts, let's instead make a kind of a building material that can be made out of useful things. You can make beds and chairs and tables. And then I started to think, right, what we need is to make a social enterprise around the world where there is poverty and where there is rubbish. People could be paid to clean the rubbish up and bring it to the machines. Because no one's going to clean the beaches for free. We have to make it financially viable. And until we actually make a business out of this rubbish and see, this kind of trash to treasure rubbish as a resource, then we can start up a social initiative which benefits the people. They get paid by weight to sort the plastic, bring it to the machine then converts it into something else, and then it's then sold, and that closes the loop. So we've been looking at this project Planet Cleanup and starting one in Colombia, which will then be able to be replicated around the world where there is this issue with rubbish. But until we make a business out of it, it's just not going to happen. So that's another project that I have been working with this group Eco Pacifico down there. Also building bricks. If you mix the chipped plastic with earth, you can make these kind of, they're like big Lego bricks which just kind of join together. But when it comes down to looking at closed loop systems, and one of the universities in Derby were really interested in becoming, a zero waste university. And they'd started separating out their compost, and they were like, wow, well, can we use this idea to all of the plastic that comes from there for them to chip it and to make their own products? You can make any mould. And these guys, it's called preciousplastic.com. It's open sourced, and it's that kind of machine that I just showed you earlier, but in a small version. And so what that means is that, at Lamas, at various places, we could all become closed loop systems to actually deal with our waste. And plastic is one of those things that it's still very hard for us to know what to do with it. So the precious plastic machines, they come in like 3 or 4 parts. The first one is you chip it all up. The second part is it's melted, it's not burnt. And then you get a mould, it's extruded into the mould of whatever it is. I've been choosing construction material because that saves cutting down forest and can be used in many, many different ways. So it's kind of looking at how we can link together. So looking at linking universities here with the universities down in Colombia, so that they can share ideas, share moulds, look at how can we actually deal with this massive issue of rubbish and turn it into something useful. So then the other project, it's like, we've got the kind of micro-remediation going on with the oil spills, and we've got the rainwater systems, and we've got the plastic, and then of course there's deforestation. Everywhere I go working in the Amazon, I see this. And this is deemed okay. This is wildlife corridors. So that, for soya and for large monocultures, they can totally cut down a massive amount of rainforest, but as long as they leave wildlife corridors, that's okay. Not if you're a jaguar. It's not really okay. And over the 20 years I've been down there, it used to all be machete. You can only clear so much rainforest with a machete, and now they can all get hold of chainsaws. And so that's why the forest is being lost at a quicker rate now than ever, and mainly for palm oil. And that's what we find, just like all this corporate stuff, it's just got loads of it in it. And so we can jump up and down and say, well, save the rainforest. But actually, how do we do this? How do we find practical ways to actually stop the deforestation? So this is palm oil. So slash and burn happens throughout the tropics. And that's basically because most trees in the tropics, they're not like here, the leaves don't just fall off and build a nice mulch. They're green all year. So they don't have any topsoil, they don't have any mulch. All of the nutrients is stored in the growth. So what they do is they cut it down, they burn it, and then they have this lovely ash, and then they can grow their crops for 2 years. By the 3rd year, the rain has washed away the topsoil, and they can't grow. They start using more and more chemical fertilizers to grow, and they just can't grow anything. So then they cut and burn more. So the slash and burn has been happening more and more in the tropics around the world, not just large-scale monoculture, but small-scale farmers, because they need a livelihood, and they don't know how to stay on their same bit of land and keep it fertile. So I was contacted by an organisation, Rainforest Saver, and they said, look, we really want to start working in the Amazon. We've been working with a form of agroforestry called Inga alley cropping. And this is the Inga tree, or guava, and it's like a long pod. Sometimes they call it the ice cream bean tree. It has these seeds which are kind of ice creamish flavour, not really, but anyway, we're not growing it for the seeds and the food, and we're not really growing it for the wood. We're growing it because the leaves fall off, and that means mulch, and it has a very good mycelial network which makes it all healthy and breaks it down, and it brings up phosphorus, and it's a nitrogen fixer, so it does all these things to create soil. And then the trees get pollarded back really hard. This has just had a good pollarding. And then between the alleys, you can start growing crops. And you've started to create a fertile soil without the need of fertilizers, and they can then stay on the same piece of land. They don't need to every 3rd year go and keep cutting down more and more forest. So what we're teaching them is to grow soil. By building healthy soil, they can stay there. And it's not just the environmental benefits, it has lots of social benefits when the men stay close to home as well. Because what's been happening is they've been going further and further away and getting themselves into all sorts of trouble. So, the women like it too, and they kind of stay close. So the women are really supporting this as well. So that's what we've been doing. And so last year I was asked to do the first trainings. And so I trained 400 farmers, and we grew 4,000 trees. And we put in the first 20 farms in the Amazon to show this as an alternative. So now we'll be going back this year with a professor from Honduras to teach about the pollarding. Since I left, another 3,000 trees have gone in, so that's 7,000 in the last year in these alleys. So it's just that form of teaching this method of agroforestry. So that's what we've been doing there. So, this is it in its pristine condition. So what, drives me to keep doing what I do. Because what we saw at the beginning, with the spills, and I now encourage you to go forward and to tell people. And for those that weren't here at the beginning, I was explaining that the worst oil spills on the planet are in the Amazon. And so my work down there has been looking at what we can do to remediate the contaminated land down there, because this is really what we want it to look like. So if you haven't heard also about the law of ecocide, please look into it. Polly Higgins, great friend of mine, great lawyer, and she's been working on how do we bring back the law of ecocide, because all what we've been seeing, they're all crimes against nature, they're crimes against humanity, and there has to be a legal framework as well. So what she's been doing is, under the United Nations, genocide came out. And at genocide's side was ecocide. And at the very last minute, they pulled ecocide out. Genocide went through, but ecocide didn't. And we desperately need that law to come back in. So if you haven't, look it up and hear Polly speak more about this law, which is so important to end a lot of what we've been seeing. So apart from that work of those kind of practical, on-the-ground solutions that I've been working with, my interest has also really come into the intelligent design behind nature and looking at nature's patterns and why it does what it does, and starting to learn with remediation, for instance, how we can work more with nature. So how many people know about biomimicry? It's just a couple of us. Man, this is it. This is where it's at. This is definitely, go back, and it's just mind-blowing, because so many of the answers, it's so obvious really that nature is the best R&D department in the world. It's kind of, billions of years of evolution, and here's humans trying to like make it up as we go along. So, I like the example of if you give man the job to make glue, most glues we make are pretty toxic, are pretty hazardous. You wouldn't want to drink them. You don't really want them in the water. But, how do these limpets and mussels, how do they stick to rocks? That's not toxic. Can we learn from nature? How is nature doing this? We can really start to replicate these ideas in a way that is not hazardous. These beautiful morpho butterflies, which I see when I'm down in the Amazon, they're one of the most beautiful colours, like a peacock's feather. They're not really blue, they're brown. It's a play on light. And again, if we asked man to make these beautiful colours, it would be pretty toxic, that kind of paint, iridescent paint that we make. And to make something that's waterproof as well. Now, how is nature making something so beautiful in the colour that it's waterproof? We've got so much to learn. So all of these examples, when they looked at a shark and they looked under a microscope and they said, well, why does a shark, nothing sticks to a shark's skin? And they discovered that the way that the platelets are together, no bacteria or nothing can actually stick on a shark's skin. So this sharklet technologies were like, wow, imagine if we could make surfaces where no bacteria could stick. Imagine hospitals and catering establishments which use bleach and bleach and bleach and bleach. Actually, could we just make a surface that just stayed bacteria free? So there are all these ideas which are coming through. Speedo also made this swimming costume, same, on the shark skin, because they're so aerodynamic that a shark, how it can move through the water, means that you go through the water quicker. So much so that they were banned at the Olympics because they give an unfair advantage. So, we are starting to look and to learn. When we first made LED lights, little tiny light, and it really wasn't very effective. And then they looked at the firefly, and it's like, how does a little tiny firefly, how does it emit so much light? And when they looked at its stomach, it wasn't round, it was jagged. And so anyone that knows about permaculture, it's all about the edge. The more surface space, the more light could be emitted. So all of these lessons are what we can really learn from the intelligent design. Why does nature do something the way that it does? A gecko, you look at how do they just walk straight up the wall and straight over the ceiling and down, how their pads are, so that they just, could just scale a building now, just copying the same kind of pads that a gecko has. This building in Zambia in Africa, they've just built this huge new apartment building. It has no air conditioning. Now, usually, all new buildings, there's so much power in air conditioning, and air conditioning is one of the worst things for climate change. The gases that are in refrigeration and in air conditioning are the worst gases that there are. So how do we find ways to not have air conditioning? Well, look to a termite mound. In the middle of the desert, those termite mounds stay at exactly the same temperature. In the day it's really hot, at night it's really cold. But the inside of a termite mound stays to the same temperature. So these architects mimicked, and they created this apartment block. And so this shows how exciting the future can be when we start to learn these lessons. So these are the main principles. Janine Benyus, she's the woman that was really behind of biomimicry. So nature runs on sunlight. It uses only the energy it needs, fits form to function, recycles everything, rewards cooperation, banks on diversity, demands local expertise, curbs excesses from within, and taps the power of limits. That's what we have to learn. This shows an example of a business that's looking at multifunction as nature does. I mean, this is actually a business that just makes beer. It just went out to make beer. But as it started to see all the different links, it was like, well, hang on, with all these spent grains that come from making the beer, we could grow mushrooms on those and we can make bread. And then, what's left over from the mushrooms, once that's spent, we can feed it to the pigs. And then the pig shit can be made into compost. And then we can collect the biogas out of it. And then the biogas, what's left over goes into an algal pond where we're also breeding fish. So in the end, it's not really a beer business. That is really looking at, a business in a much broader sense of the word. So this is where we really need to move to, is closed loop systems. And we see it in nature with compost and compost toilets and how, we eat it and then we shit it and it goes back into the ground, and we eat it and we shit it and it goes back into the ground. It's a perfect closed loop system. But we can and we desperately need to do the same with technical nutrients, being that which comes from technology. I recently had a little run-in with Apple, and my computer needed a new fan. So I phoned up Apple and I said about, the fan, and they said, oh no, your computer is more than 6 years old. So I said, that's right, but it just needs a new fan. No, because it's more than 6 years, we don't repair things after 6 years. It's now obsolete. So I said, no, it's not obsolete. It's definitely not obsolete. It's totally fine. I've made loads of films and I've done lots of presentations. It's just the fan is a bit noisy. No, it's obsolete. So I said, okay, can you just tell me what you do with all these iGadgets, all these iPhones and iPads and iMacs and, what's happening to them? What are you recycling? And the person at customer service went quiet and said, hang on, I'll just get a manager. Hang on, this is a simple question here. So manager came back on and I explained the question. What do you recycle at Apple? Oh no, sorry, we'll get someone to call you back. So I then get called, hello, this is executive relations at Apple. We hear that customer service can't help you. And I said, well, it's a very, very easy question. What do you recycle? And again, there's this silence, and I'm like, hang on, surely they have some greenwash paragraph. Like, all of the minerals that you use in all the iGadgets, are you reclaiming any of them? Because the planet is now awash with apples. And what are you doing with these technical nutrients? Because I know in Ecuador, we are opening up the national parks to get copper out. And it's like, man, we don't want to open up national parks to start getting more and more minerals. Why can't we just use the minerals that are already in? Why can't we close our technical nutrient cycle? So, my challenge to you is all phone Apple and just ask them what their recycling program is. Because I think they need to be pushed a little bit on this. Because, it comes down to consumer demand. We all buy it without thinking about it. And if we start having this communication with them and saying, you know what, actually, I don't want to keep supporting you if you cannot be responsible. It is about, this cradle to cradle. In the future, a company does need to be responsible for its product from when it is built to when it dies, and then what happens beyond. There's an idea that it would be much better to rent machines, rent things, not buy them, because then they would build it to last, they would build it to be dismantled, and build it to be upgraded. And you would have it for a few years, and then when you gave it back and you got another one, and then they would be part of looking at how to recycle those technical nutrients. Now this pit is in Outer Mongolia. This is the latest toxic pits. And this comes from smartphones, solar panels, wind turbines and electric cars. Today's modern technology is using all sorts of rare earth minerals. So of course, I speak on the importance of renewable energy. It goes without saying that if you haven't already changed your energy company and you're not living off-grid, change it to a green provider, Ecotricity, Good Energy, or any of those. Because we do need to all support green energy providers. However, the question is, all the time we're stuck in the paradigm of mine it, make it, dump it, mine it, make it, dump it, mine it, make it, dump it. It doesn't matter if it's a solar panel or a wind turbine or electric car. They're still doing the same. But now it's in Outer Mongolia and nobody knows about it. but these pits are radioactive. And they have the rare earth minerals that is needed in today's modern technology. And recently I spoke to a big solar provider, and I asked him, I said, so all your solar panels, where does your waste go? And he held his heart, and he said, oh, Nicola, don't ask me. And I said, no, we need to have this conversation. He said, I can't do anything about that. I said, within your industry, you need to start talking about it, because we can't pretend that, electric cars and wind turbines and solar panels have no impact. They do. And they mainly do because of this paradigm that we're stuck in of mining something, making it and dumping it without looking at that entire cycle. I mean, that's nature's waste. Nature makes something from the very ground that it lives on. It makes it, and then when it's finished with it, that shell will just go back to sand. So how can we learn from that? How can we learn to make something from local on-site resources and then to have a plan with it to do at the end of its life? So at the end of the day, it is about it's our choice, it's our voice, we speak up, and everything we do has this amazing ripple effect. That pound in our pocket, us questioning these businesses. We need change, and it takes us to use our voices to start questioning corporations and really being aware of those purchases that you make. Who are you banking with? Who are you giving your money to? Who are you giving your energy, your power to? Who is giving you your food? And this is where we start to really get empowered, because we make those choices ourselves. And it's for me really exciting to be able to kind of direct the path that I'd like to see in the future. Because, we've seen there's a lot of problems, but there's a lot of solutions as well. And it's focusing on that, which is what's really important. So that's kind of given you some ideas of the work that I've been doing over the last 20 years. And what I haven't put in there, which is my latest work, which all of my other projects have been put on a back burner at the moment, because a couple of months ago the oil industry decided to drill in my village in Sussex. Wrong choice. They tried to keep it really quiet, and then I happened to talk to a councillor one day who told me, and I'm like, sorry, hang on, what? An oil well in the village? No. Why don't we public consultation? No. So I go to the parish councils, I speak with the councils, and I said, no, there needs to be public consultation here. And UK Oil and Gas, who are drilling, their plan is between 300 and 2,400 oil wells in the Weald, just in that small part of the southern England. And nationally, they're looking at 50,000 oil wells. So they're saying that we have as much oil under this land as there is in the North Sea. This is the government plan now, is to drill for oil and gas. And they are trying desperately to keep it quiet from us. It is really important, go and speak to your parish councils, because otherwise it is all just slipping through without anybody knowing. I didn't know anything about it until I happened to have a passing conversation with a councillor. And then I called a public meeting in our local village hall. And 160 people came. We totally packed out the village hall. So much so we had to call another meeting. And 120 people came to the next meeting. Well then, UCOG got really pissed with me. Because all of a sudden, I was starting to tell the locals, do you want this? It's not just about the NIMBYism. No, not in my backyard. I don't want it in my backyard. But I don't want it for this country. I don't want it for the planet. We need to move on. But unless we hold them accountable for what they will do, that is the plan. And I just knew about my 2,400 possibilities. And when I went to visit with Polly recently, I was talking about Polly Higgins from the Eco Side, she told me about the plan of 50,000 national wells. So it's something we need to be aware of. And, all those years of me working in the Amazon with the indigenous resistance and saying, well, where's our indigenous resistance? Where's our indigenous people? And I kind of realised it's us. We are the indigenous people of this land. And we need to stand up. Because otherwise we're going to have this land drilled and you're going to see like the photographs that you saw at the beginning. That's the worst case scenario. God forbid it won't happen. But all of my questions, and I've had a very, very simple question for the parish council, the district council, the county council, for UCOG, and my question is, if there is an incident below ground or above ground, can you please tell me what is your emergency rapid response plan? And nobody can. And it's like, in this day of health and safety, how can you not have an emergency plan if something goes wrong? And it's not if, it's when. Because we might have a few wells where we don't have incidents. It doesn't mean to say that every well is going to contaminate. But this land is very fractured. And the nature of this island being as fractured as it is means that the risks are higher to our water. So when they drill down, and my well, I have just heard the first one collapsed and they have now just drilled a second well. What they plan to do in each pad is to drill 8 to 12 wells going off in each direction. And that's what, if you have a look, they call them pedals, PEDLs, for the UK, you will see that this land is covered in blocks that they want to get oil and gas from. So it's really important that we know, that we're able to speak up, that we're able to find out information. And the government has now changed the word fracking. So, of course, everybody straight away goes, oh, is it fracking? Well, now the government has changed the definition. We can't say that it is fracking, no. What happened in Lancashire, which most people are aware of with the earthquake, according to the new government definition, that would not be a fracked well. They have changed the definition to make that they can get away with it a lot easier. And if it's not using high pressure water, it's something called acidization, which uses a lot of acid. And I've been carrying around, like my Bible, 212 pages of all the chemicals that they use for this technique. And I've been going up to the MPs and to the councillors and saying, can we discuss these chemicals? I printed it off, and with a fluoro marker, I went through everywhere where it said, fatal to aquatic life, carcinogenic, hazardous, toxic, do not allow to enter waterways. And I went through it and I marked it. And so now I turn up with my little book, and the latest thing from the oil industry is, we are using a biodegradable potato starch drilling fluid. I'm so pleased they are. Can we talk about the other 26 chemicals? Because this is their story now. They keep on wanting to talk about their biodegradable potato starch drilling fluid. And it's great that they are talking about it. But every time I say, that's really good, can we please talk about these ones? Nobody wants to talk about the other ones. And so, it's for us having that education and having that information to ask questions. And so our well, which is the Broadford Bridge, we've called it now the Broadford Bridge Action Group. It used to be called Keep Billingshurst Frack Free. But now we're like, well, okay, if they don't want to call it fracking, let's not use the word fracking. It doesn't matter about fracking or not fracking. It is still extraction, and we need to leave it in the ground. So don't get caught up on the terminology of it, because what they're doing is they're turning it against the protesters. And they keep saying, those protesters don't know what they're talking about. They just keep on about fracking. So we have to kind of learn and evolve and adapt for us to be able to protect this land. So I think that I've done my little download enough so you can all go out your own ways and spread the good tidings. So, looking at, obviously for me to tell the solutions, we also have to know what the problems are. And, I've spent so many years working with biologists and geologists and mycologists. I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a solutionologist. Until someone tried to sue me for it. I got a letter from a woman in America, from her legal team, saying, we hear that you're using the word solutionologist. This is a patented, trademarked title. Sorry? And I'm just like, really? No. I want to start the school of solutionology, where we can all learn all the solutions to get ourselves out of the shit that we're currently in. I really look forward to hearing from you. I never heard anything. So I thought I'll carry on using it then. And so, it's that whole thing. It's like, yes, we really do need to focus on what we can do. It's not just about what we can't do. It's not that, we're going to live in this eco world and we're all going to be wearing kind of no clothes and acting like, the Flintstones. So, there is this positive vision. And so showing some of those examples of biomimicry gives you that idea of whether you're in chemistry or architecture or whatever your line of interest is. There's a website called Ask Nature. Go to that. And asknature.com has got a lot of information. My website, Eyes of Gaia, has a lot of information. And, it's out there. So thank you for listening. And if anyone has any questions, I don't know whether Judith, the timing of do we have questions?
Question time?
Yeah. You just all had like a major. Any questions? So preciousplastic.com, that's one to remember for the machines. Amazon Myco Renewal Project, anyone that's interested in myco remediation and how to remediate oil spills using fungi. Anyone's interested in learning about building rainwater systems, they can come and say, I have the little stall next in the room, which is what supports the rainwater systems. And I've got more kind of information and photos there. So, yeah, but any other, not just questions, things that other examples of biomimicry or anything else that anybody else wants to bring to share with the group.
Where did you say that, where did you say the plastic bottles and things came from? The Amazon, or is it just from the ocean?
The plastic bottles in the Amazon generally come from just the villages themselves. A lot of it is tourism.
Oh, really?
Tourism has such a negative impact in that way that, where tourists, they have this kind of trail of plastic bottles around the world. So a lot of it is from that. But the rubbish itself is just, if you buy a pencil, they'll put it in a plastic bag. And so there's just oil. And they don't understand about rubbish. Like batteries. Batteries are just thrown in the rivers. And batteries are something which is super contaminant. And often you see in the Amazon they even open the batteries because it's a free kind of lead that you can draw with. And often I've seen in villages people with these black marks on them. And I'm like, what, you've got these black marks on? You're going to a war dance or something? And they say, oh no, we've just been helping men. And when they go logging, they'll cut down a tree, and then to make a nice straight line to get the chainsaws to plank it up, they will get a piece of string, and one stands one end, the other stands the other. Put the battery, open the battery up, tip it on it, and go bing, and then makes a nice straight line. So it's bloody marvellous. So as far as they're concerned, these batteries, you open them up, and they've got this great stuff, and we can just draw like these pencil lines on everything. Nobody has ever told them it's highly toxic. The little kids are running around barefoot. They just don't know. So I've done campaigns on the radio, like Campesino radio stations, speaking about the importance of batteries and what do we do. Just right now, just put them in a bottle. Just deal with until we can do something with the batteries. Right now, the best thing is just to put them in a bottle, and we'll just deal with them when we can. So it's kind of adapting to the village needs. And
so you don't have a waste removal?
No. Waste removal is usually fire or water. Throw it in the river will take it away. Or put it in the fire will take it away. So, yes, and a lot of these places there just isn't any kind of, we live in this world where we just put it in the right coloured bin and then off it goes. Yeah.
I really love the movement of biomimicry. I think it's absolutely extraordinary. And I still have a discrepancy inside, which is, so say for example, mimicking the burr plant, you know, and Velcro. But then Velcro is made using synthetic materials. And I find that discrepancy really difficult to reconcile.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where I sit with it, because so many of the things that are being mimicked are being mimicked with synthetic materials.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, we need to learn from nature, but actually,
Yeah.
maybe we just need to become more natural
Yeah.
in our living habits.
And how do we make it out of natural materials?
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the stepping stones that, you know, we are so addicted to petroleum. You know, we really are. We have a major problem with it on so many levels. You know, and I was just with this lovely conscious group of people doing this meditation, you know, and I'm like, oh, I'm just like surrounded by tea lights. And I just look at tea lights and I'm like, it's petrol. It's petrochemicals. I would rather just there be one beeswax candle in the middle. But we don't see that. And so we don't see that everything is made of petrochemicals. And so seeing that also in biomimicry, it's like that's the stage we're on. And I do actually do a full talk on biomimicry, and I do bring that up, and I show in one of the slides, it talks about, you know, man-made, the adaptation of synthetic, you know, and totally petrochemical, which shows that how does a burr stick to you being a burr, you know, and what are those essences that as a plant fibre that would be able to do that. But it's huge, and it's still in its infancy. I think at the moment it's almost just about planting the seeds of people to see that we just need to humble ourselves to realise that teacher, this great mentor that we have in nature, that has a measure that looks at everything and it doesn't over-exceed itself. And there's so much that, you know, we can really learn from that, because we're so excessive by nature, and we want it, and we want more, and we want more, and we want more. And it was interesting because I just heard myself saying that earlier, because often, you know, people will come up to me and they see my stool, Amazonia, and they'll say, oh, how many times have you had ayahuasca? It's the first question, Amazonia. And I say, well, I've been really lucky because I've met some real elders down there. They would never charge me. And it's very rare for the people in the Amazon to drink. I mean, hardly anybody I know down there has ever had it, which is amazing. It's just not something that people drink down there. The shaman does. And then he may have a couple of people that will come. And over the 18 years of me working down there, and when I have been invited, that's what I've seen, is this experience. And my real concern here is that we want it, and we want more, and more, and more, and more. And I think we really have to question the sustainability of it. Are we growing that for us, or are we wild harvesting it? Because how many threads can we take out of the tapestry? You know, we need to know where it comes from. And I see that with coffee and with cacao, that the people down there don't drink coffee. They don't eat chocolate. It is all 100% exported. So, and I'm seeing that now with ayahuasca. There's a big business in it. So people are just going into the forest, they're taking what they can, they're brewing it up, they're bottling it, and they're sending it away. So, you know, really start questioning that with people that if you know people that are leading ceremonies, just ask them, where are you getting it from? Are you growing it? Because that's what we want. And what we really want is to come back into the wisdom of this land and the roots of this land and the plant spirit medicine of this land, which is magic mushrooms. And it's growing our own food, growing our own herbs and our own medicine, and growing our own psychedelics, calling on the animal spirits of this land, you know, and really connecting back in to what it means to be indigenous to this land.